The 2025 NFL free agency period is almost upon us, and we're a long ways away from the season, so I figured I'd do a 2026 season NFL quarterback rankings, looking over the top 10 QBs going into next year. There are three honorable mentions that I would like to come up with, those being CJ Stroud, he's really good, but he has no O line. Jordan Love, good, but for some reason also not good. And Sam Darnold, who was good, but cannot figure out how to come in clutch. We will see that later on in the top 10, but he's not exactly as proven as those guys later on. So we are going to get started with number 10. And at number 10, we have Bo Nix, quarterback, Denver Broncos. Now, I was going through a lot of the list about the quarterbacks that are in the league, and there are a lot of guys that came to mind, like the three dudes in the honorable mentions category. And really, I think you can see a valid reason for all three of those guys and Bo Nix to rotate in the number 10 spot. But I think Bo Nix just has the slight edge. He made the playoffs as a rookie, didn't win, didn't do particularly well, but showed a lot of really good signs. And the Broncos are looking to make a lot of good offseason moves to make themselves more of a title contender than they already were. They already have a wide receiver core. They have Bo Nix. They have a great offensive line. I think what they need to get is some more defense and a few more weapons for Bo Nix to work with, preferably a tight end and maybe a running back, depending on how that goes over there. But Bo Nix, I would say, is the 10th quarterback on this list, even though you could really switch him out with any of the other guys in the honorable mentions, and I wouldn't be particularly mad. We move on to the number 9 spot, and at the number 9 spot, I have Justin Herbert, quarterback, LA Chargers. Justin Herbert is once again another situation because he's had this situation 3 times in his career. Really, really good quarterback who just cannot get it done in the playoffs. Hasn't won a single playoff game in his career. But I think if you do get another structure around Justin Herbert, and I know we've been saying this for years now, I think he can win that playoff game eventually. Is he that kind of leader to do it? We will see. But I think going into the season, if you want to have a winning record, Justin Herbert is a guy to have as your quarterback. He's got weapons to work with now with Ladd McConkey and a slightly more locked-in Quentin Johnston and a mediocre at best defense, at least to back him up a little bit. Now, the Chargers aren't particularly crazy good, and I don't expect to see them in any, real title situation. Just kidding. I have them in the AFC Championship game this year. Go watch that video, by the way. So I do hope that Justin Herbert does well for himself and makes his way up this list, as he is talented enough to do so. And maybe we'll see flashes of Ricky Herbo that we haven't seen since. We move on to the number 8 spot, and with the number 8 spot, we have Jared Goff, quarterback, Detroit Lions. The Lions were probably the best team in the regular season in the NFL last season. You can argue the Chiefs having a slightly better record, and they were tied by the end of the year. But I think if you look at the games that the Chiefs played compared to the games that the Lions played, Chiefs didn't particularly have as many blowouts as the Lions did. See the 50-point blowout against the Jaguars, and yes, the Jags suck, but even still, a 50-point game is nothing to shy away from. Nevertheless, Jared Goff is a very talented quarterback, was top 5 in a lot of stats like touchdowns, passing yards, etc., and led his team with a not particularly good receiving core with Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown really being just 2 dudes there. There were some guys there like Tim Patrick and a okay year from Sam Laporta, but a lot of it was on Jared, and he certainly delivered, having a stellar season. Unfortunately, did not lead to any wins in the playoffs, but either way, the Lions did well for themselves, so he goes at number 8 on this list. We move on to the number 7 slot with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield is one of those quarterbacks. I mentioned it in my Seahawks video. Also go watch that. He is the rich man's Geno Smith. He is really good, always puts up tons of passing yards with the most random wide receiver you've ever heard of, and always has a billion touchdowns for no reason. However, the reason that is a difference between Geno and Baker is that Baker can win in the playoffs. Baker has consistently won for the Bucs in the playoffs over the past couple of years. Given he didn't do it last year, but 2 years before that, he beat a good Eagles team, and 2 years before that, he beat another team that I don't remember because I didn't bother doing my research, but I do know that they at least made the divisional round. So Baker can win in the playoffs, and I expect that he will be doing more of that this year, but I actually don't remember what I said they would do in the playoffs in my power rankings, so I think he will. Maybe I'll have to make that adjustment in hindsight. Either way, Baker and the Bucs will likely be going to the divisional round, so he goes at number 7 on this slot. At number 6, we have Patrick Mahomes, quarterback, Kansas City Chiefs. This one I've been thinking about a lot. I was like, where's Mahomes on this list? Because he took his team to the Super Bowl. You cannot hold him for that. And I had to put him, on this list, no matter what. But his season wasn't crazy. He didn't put up Mahomes numbers. He still had a solid season, but if you compare him to other players, he had, let's see, if we look at passing yards, he had less yards than Sam Darnold. He had less touchdowns, I think, than Aaron Rodgers, which is a very poor statistic given how bad Rodgers' season was. Yeah, he had 2 less passing touchdowns than Aaron Rodgers and the same amount of interception. So all in all, nothing particularly crazy. If we look at completion percentage, he had, I think, a career low at 67.5%, which was lower than likely the best quarterback in the league at the time, Joe Burrow. It was lower than Lamar Jackson, obviously had a very high one. Jared Goff had a very high one. But if you look at 67.5 on this list, that's below players like Derek Carr and Josh Dobbs. Those are not the guys you want to be behind in a top quarterbacks list, Patrick. I'm sorry. You need to be completing more of your passes than that. You're completing less than Tommy DeVito. That's a disappointing stat to see. Nevertheless, he is still very, very good, and it is valid to see that they could once again make the Super Bowl. We will see if they do. But I cannot put him any higher than 6 because of him having an off year. I'm just saying, maybe the Chiefs might fall off a little bit. Just a little bit. At number 5, I have Jaden Daniels, quarterback, Washington Commanders. I trust Jaden Daniels more than Patrick Mahomes for one reason and one reason only. Jaden Daniels won games convincingly. He didn't have particularly many games where it was like, whoa, wow, what a blowout loss, other than the NFC Championship game. He beat the Eagles earlier on in the year. He beat the Bears in a great game. And yes, it did come down to a last-second Hail Mary, but that was all on Jaden. It was a deflected ball, but it still got to the end zone, and that's what mattered. All in all, it was a great year from Jaden Daniels. Offensive Rookie of the Year. It's an award that few people get, and he's one of the guys to get it because of how well he did. So I trust him a lot. He brought his team to the NFC Championship game as a rookie, a very impressive stat. Did he lose? Absolutely. But he lost to the team that won the Super Bowl, so I don't think we can really hold him for doing so. And all in all, an incredible year. And yes, I'm from the DC area. You can say that I'm biased here, and I probably am. But I'm not a particularly big fan of the Commanders. So even still, I do think Jaden Daniels is a very trustworthy guy to put your faith into. Could we see a sophomore slump? Absolutely. But from what we saw last year, I do think he is the 5th best person to put your money into this offseason. At the number 4 slot, we have Super Bowl MVP Jalen Hurts, Philadelphia Eagles. There are 3 quarterbacks that I have ranked above Jalen, although realistically, Jalen should be higher on this list. He's the Super Bowl MVP and a Super Bowl champion, period, for that reason. He's incredibly talented, very, very good, led his team to a ring. And yes, was Saquon a lot of that? True. And that's why I think he is at this point, because he was good, but there was also the fact that Saquon brought him through most of the games until the Super Bowl itself. That's when Jalen really showed how he can play. Nevertheless, Jalen is still very, very good. I'm not trying to downplay his talent. He had a solid amount of passing yards, but he obviously made up for that in his rushing yards. Same with his touchdowns. And all in all, helped his Eagles get their 2nd ring in history. At the number 3 slot, we have Lamar Jackson, the runner-up for the MVP award. This is not really that crazy of a selection to put the runner-up for the MVP at the number 3 spot. And you might be thinking, who is the other person? Well, I mentioned him earlier, and if you read into stats, it makes sense as to why he's on the list. So, as I said, we'll get to him in a bit. But Lamar Jackson himself obviously led the Ravens to the playoffs once again, beat a team, I don't remember, beat the Steelers, who were not a threat, and then immediately lost, as the Ravens do almost every single season. So if we talk about playoffs, you kidding me? Playoffs? I don't want to hear nothing about playoffs. It's probably Lamar Jackson every time he gets asked about that in interviews, because playoffs is the spot where he can't particularly win games. Matter of fact, he can't win more than 2 games in a playoff run, can he? Because I don't think he ever has. Woo-hoo. Uh-oh. Obviously a big issue, but nevertheless, there you go. So, Lamar Jackson, obviously very talented outside of the playoffs, but once he gets there, it is, of course, an issue for him. But I'm saying all this just to say it because I think it needs to be said before I talk about how good his regular season was. He had a very, very good regular season. If you look at passing yards and touchdowns, completion percentage was probably through the roof. I don't know where it is on the page I'm looking on right now, but let's see if we go to. I did not mean to go that way. One second. So he had a 66.7 completion percentage, nothing particularly crazy, but even still, he had 41 passing touchdowns to accompany with only 4 interceptions, a wild pairing, and 4,100 yards to accompany with his 5,754 billion rushing yards over the course of the year. So I think all in all, it constitutes a pretty good season from Lamar Jackson. We move on to the top 2, and at number 2, we have your MVP, MVP, MVP. We are not balling in this joint because they can't win in the playoffs. Sounds like Lamar. Josh Allen at number 2. Josh Allen, obviously a very talented quarterback in his own right. However, once again, one of those guys just can't get it done in the playoffs. No fault to him. C'est la vie. But he won the MVP for a reason. I don't think I really need to talk about this one too much. It's Josh Allen. He always has a ton of yards. He always leads his team at least to the playoffs, likely to get at least one win in there, maybe make it to the championship game, get bounced by the Chiefs. It's life. But, it's life in the AFC. I understand that. But he's doing the best with what he has, working with Walmart cashiers as wide receivers and Khalil Shakir because he's fun. So props to Josh Allen for doing what he's doing, getting all these touchdowns with way less interceptions than I think anybody could have expected for him to get. If you look at touchdowns, he was seventh in passing touchdowns, but he had a bunch of rushing touchdowns to go along with it. He only had 6 interceptions. He had 3,700 passing yards, and as I said earlier, also had a ton of rushing yards. So those balance each other out, and all in all, had a great year. He won the MVP for a reason. He's caught a touchdown. He's rushed a touchdown. He's thrown a billion touchdowns at this point. Props to Josh Allen. Although I do not think he is the best quarterback going into this season, though, as at number 1, we have Joe Burrow. This is the guy I was talking about earlier. Burrow, man, what could have been if he had a defense? I mean, what can I even say? The man has a rough rider offensive line next to no defense. He's putting up absurd numbers and just losing games. He had 43 touchdowns, led the league. 4,900 passing yards, led the league. His completion percentage was over 70%, attempting 652 passes, which is absurd. He didn't even throw 10 interceptions. He was 108 rating, which is way lower than he should be, really. But he took 48 sacks for almost 300 yards over the course of the year. And that's just his O-line. His defense was awful. So you think Joe Burrow had one of the greatest quarterback seasons of all time. It wasn't a 5,000-yard season, but it was still a great season, and he was able to help Jamar Chase have the Triple Crown. But his defense offset him so badly that no one's going to remember it in 10, 15 years because it was, but they didn't make the playoffs, and he didn't get MVP votes. He did, but he didn't get that many MVP votes, and he didn't get any recognition, representation, nothing. So, unfortunately, it's going to be a year forgotten to history. But all in all, it was one of the best seasons in NFL history, at least for Joe Burrow, probably his best in his career. Props to him for that. Unfortunately, the Bengals did not make the playoffs, so that year will never be remembered again. But Joe Burrow is my number 1 QB going into 2026. Make sure you have a good day, good evening, good night, good morning, good dawn, good dusk, good whatever. Make sure to watch any former or future videos on the channel. And goodbye.